Hello YouTube, I'm here to talk about how at the age of 50 I got a late diagnosis of autism. It's been 3 years since my NHS diagnosis and I'm still finding my way around my autism diagnosis. To start with, let me make it clear I am not a medical professional. I'm just here to talk about my lived experience. Along the way, I'd like to learn more about autism and ADHD, and I ask you to join me on my educational and inspiring journey about late diagnosis and all things neurodivergent. So, a little bit about me. I'm from London. I live in the south of England. I'm a very wordy person who used to read a lot of books constantly, but though I know a lot of words, I often have trouble putting them in the right order and using the appropriate word for what I want to describe. I consistently mispronounce words, mainly because I mostly know them from the printed page, so not necessarily in conversation. And if you want to point out and correct with better words or pronunciation, pop a comment in there. And also, I like to use a lot of cliches, mixed metaphors and random sayings. When I started on this journey 3 years ago, I sort of vaguely knew I was different from other people in general, but I had no inkling that I could possibly be autistic. When I was a child, I'd stare at myself in the mirror and ask the question, am I a changeling? Now, a changeling is a myth from old European fairy tales where a family's baby is replaced by a changeling baby who's unusually different from the rest of the family, perhaps strange, withdrawn, or just very different qualities. This is the meaning that I know from reading old fairy tales in the 1970s as a child who read a lot of books. And the other question I had sometimes was, have I been adopted? Now, I knew logically I hadn't been adopted, but I was looking for an explanation as to why I was so different from the rest of the family. I couldn't work it out, and I just wondered a lot and tried to find theories that would fit why I was so different. Then as I got older, got past my teens, I saw Rain Man, the film, which was a huge hit in the late 80s. It was absolutely everywhere. You couldn't get away from this film. And when I eventually watched it, I thought, oh, this is a great film. But I also saw I'm not a maths genius. I'm not a man. I do not present in any way like Dustin Hoffman's character in this film. And in the late 80s, this was the only representation of autism I and a lot of other people actually knew of. So in my mind, I just did not associate autism with myself in any way. Fast forward 30 years, and my sister, around 5 years ago, was having various issues with her kids in primary school. This eventually led to her kids being diagnosed autistic, and then about a year after that, my sister was late diagnosed autistic. I mean, at that point, I still didn't click. I didn't associate autism with my sister whatsoever, and she started talking about how autism presents in women and girls. Over time, over many months, I began to realise how I interacted with her kids, how they were and how I am was pretty similar. And after many chats with my sister over a cup of tea in her kitchen, I eventually came round to the idea maybe I'm neurodivergent, and I asked for a referral from the GP. Long story short, I had an assessment and I was diagnosed autistic in 2020 and have been on a journey of self-discovery since. Now, I present as a chatterbox. I can talk the hind leg off a donkey, which is a trait you wouldn't normally associate with an autistic person. Well, I wouldn't anyway. Turns out autism presents differently in women than it does in men, and it also turns out you can have autism and ADHD combined, which I believe is me, although I've not been officially diagnosed with the ADHD part as yet. And now I learn that when you get autism and ADHD combined, in my case, the chattering incessantly part of my personality makes perfect sense in that context, because it just didn't seem to fit in with just my autism diagnosis. ADHD can have the effect of hiding my autism traits. The autism traits are there, but not as recognisable sometimes. And there is also the issue of how autism presents differently in women. As far as I see it, we as women mask from such an early age. We may not even realise we're masking. We're socialised into it. We get into a lot of trouble if we behave out of ordinary in school. And on top of that, I recently learned that 2013 was the first time that clinicians were allowed to diagnose both ADHD and autism concurrently. This is when the DSM-5 was published. And I think this is important because people with indications of both were missed, as an autistic child was not allowed to be given a diagnosis for ADHD clinically, and vice versa. They couldn't have ADHD and autism together officially until 2013. So I have been looking back since my diagnosis, looking back at my life up till then, and sort of trying to make sense of certain aspects, why I could never keep a job for long. I got bored very quickly. Basically, I have the attention of a gnat in all sorts of different situations, generally not fitting in, never making friends, or sometimes I would make a friend. I started college, I made a friend on the first day, we chatted all day, and the next day she was talking to someone else and it wouldn't even look at me. And this was something that happened a lot, and I never did make a friend at that college. I know I must have done something wrong, said something wrong or something, but I will never know what it was. One of my main issues was I would go from job to job. I worked in various customer service jobs like Woolworths, worked as in the refectory at a college, and what I found was I just couldn't keep a job for long. I would make sure to keep a job for at least a year so that I had something on my CV, but it was very difficult to do. I never thought about the fact that I had no social life, or that I wasn't going to cafes, or these little things, because I thought it was normal that if I was working during the week, then I needed a few days of staying at home and not going anywhere to recover. So that all gets looked at in a very different light now, one where I'm not constantly criticising myself to start off with. I used to be called lazy a lot and very laid back, and looking back on it, I was just really tired and overwhelmed all the time. So those are just a few things to start off with that I've been looking back on that have just turned everything upside down in how my life has been up till now. This channel will be something that helps me grow and learn, and you too. Now, you could be curious about autism. Maybe you know someone neurodivergent. Are you the parent of an autistic child? Do you find yourself hanging out with neurodivergent people a lot? Are you neurodivergent, figuring out life, the world, and living in it? Or you could suspect that you're neurodivergent and you're having a listen out of interest. So I hope this is helpful to everyone. I just want to say that since my autism diagnosis, I've been a lot more tolerant and mindful of my various coping mechanisms for coping with my needs. My self-care has grown, although I'm still self-critical. I'm learning not to be so hard on myself. I'm finding I'm not as tense and worried all the time as I was before diagnosis. Don't get me wrong, I still have tense times and worried times, but just not as much, not nearly as much. And now I feel a lot lighter, and when I get overwhelmed, I'm better at leaving the situation or making small changes to make it more comfortable. I'd like to build more confidence for myself and others. So my name is Audie Gear. Tune in next time for more from Audie Gear.